5. Well. Happy Friday, everybody. What's going on, Eric Range? How are you, brother?
I am doing well. It is Friday. I think we're going to be all right, from the storm. We've been getting a lot of rain, but we're doing okay, man. It's Friday, and we got a family on the day. So
we got family on the day.
So I'm always excited because whenever, that I call him the man. Everybody else call him Leo Bridgewater. But, when he come on to the show, man, it's always fire. So
it's straight fire. So you guys, hey, everybody, happy Friday. Listen, the chat's going to be open. Shoot out your comments. Tell us how you feel. Give us some love. We give you some love back. You on with Can I Talk with Roz, with co-host with Eric Range. And today we talking about New Jersey. New Jersey went in, and November 3rd, over 67% of the voters voted on yes for an adult use cannabis bill. Now, one of our guests, he could have told you a long time ago it was going to happen. He was like, listen, I already know it was going to happen. So, today's show and how we talk about it is going, now that they're legal, what happens next? And we are sounding off today, right?
And you know what, Roz, the other thing too, man, I think while we didn't have a clear winner for the president on election night, cannabis was certainly a clear winner across the country in terms of the number of states who had some type of referendum on the ballot and so on. I believe all of them were successful. Now, again, that's not to say that we are where we need to be, but it's a good thing when you can look out on election night and have that many states. It's just an amazing thing. It shows that we're in a very different place for this conversation across the country. So,
absolutely,
that's exciting.
All right. So without further ado, we're just going to bring our guests on. We're going to love on them. We're going to have them introduce themselves to everybody. But what you know them, and they are so near and dear to our hearts. So we're bringing on Leo Bridgewater and Mr. Jessica Gonzalez. What's going on, family? How are you?
Oh, sorry. I was trying to get one in before y'all put me on. Sorry. Okay.
I told you it was going to be fire.
Well, yeah, like for real fire. I'm sorry. Let me get professional. Sorry. Pastor, First Lady. Hello. Deaconess
yes.
Gonzalez. Hello.
Listen. Hey, we got folks on. We got people on looking at us there. Listen. Yes. What's going on, sister? How you doing, my love? How are you?
Good. It's been a week.
It's been a week.
Gonzalez.
Listen,
Jessica, it has been quite the year for you. I don't know, but I'm just going to put it out there and say this has been the year of Jessica Gonzalez, if you ask me. We are just so humbled as an organization to have you working with us. But, you truly fight for what you believe in, and you fight for a lot of different people who don't even know you're fighting for them. And so, again, my just hats off to you for everything that you've been doing. I think you've had a rock star year.
Yes.
Nothing less to be expected. Yeah.
And work your butt off.
But couldn't have done, without the support of Emperor MM. I've always got to give you guys a big shout out for, just giving me the platform, the network, and to do what I need to do.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm going to just say I respect her because she popped me. She popped people. Get it done. Get the paperwork signed. Right?
All Latina.
Yeah.
Latina, 100%.
Passionate. Y'all passionate. And E, you know how stupid we be. We need them kind of strong women that'll pop you to do the right thing. That's Jess all day. You can tell she helped raise some of her male relatives.
So listen, so we got Jessica Gonzalez, we got Leo Bridgewater on, we got Tahir Johnson. He's going to be coming in a few minutes. Jessica, introduce yourself to people who don't know you and know what you do and how you do it. Give them a quick 30-second intro as to who you are and what you do in this industry.
Sure. So, hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. So, I'm Jess Gonzalez, and I am a cannabis and intellectual property attorney at a law firm in New Jersey called Bressler, Amory and Ross. And I also have the distinct honor of being outside counsel for minorities for medical marijuana. And I also sit on the policy committee for the Minority Cannabis Business Association. And most recently, I was part of NJCAN, which was a coalition to help push forward equitable legalization. So I've been in really the fight for social equity ever since I started. So actually, when I looked back on my career, I've been a lawyer for almost 4 years. 3 out of those 4 years have been in cannabis. 75% of my career has been solely focused in cannabis and helping to make sure that we're pushing for minority involvement and those most harmed.
Wow. Yep. And we're just so thankful from M4MM to have you in your role. You have definitely lifted us in the last year that you've been with us, lifted our profile. Someone that you don't like skirt around to it. Like people, you can have all the different things that you do, but that advocacy give back is so important, and you just share it, and we appreciate you so much. And so
and she's lifted so many of our members and other individuals through her education.
Yes.
Like not just, hey, we out here advocating for it, but she's also there, doing what she can to help you as a business owner who's trying to get into this space, protect yourself and figure out, how to navigate through this crazy field that, cannabis is. So again, just thank you, Jessica, for everything you're doing. And I'm excited to hear more about how you really push things there in New Jersey, which is what we're going to be talking about today.
Sure.
So listen, man, if you don't know this gentleman, if you don't know who he is,
the man right here.
God bless you. Listen, let me tell you something. I met this man over 4 years ago. Didn't know his face, but walked into him at the CWCB Expo that was in New York, and bumped into him, and he was like, "Roz, Leo," and it was love, and it was hugging, and he is a hardworking brother that has been advocating for fair and equitable legalization of the plant in his state. He goes hard for New Jersey. If you guys don't understand, he goes so hard for New Jersey. Without further ado, Leo Bridgewater, introduce yourself, brother.
Well,
Welcome.
I mean, well, Dan, you did a good job. I don't know if I want to build on that. I'd like to leave it at that. Because if I was white, I'd be red from blushing. That was dope. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Leo Bridgewater. I am the National Director of Veterans Outreach with Minorities for Medical Marijuana. I also am the Chief Innovation Officer for CWCB Education. Along with Roz McCarthy, I sit on the advisory board for the CWCB Expo. And I also sit on the subcommittee for minority inclusion and equity with the National Hemp Association. And I sit on the advisory board for Veterans Ananda, which is a 22-acre farm up in upstate New York, where we help first responders and veterans with therapeutic measures in hemp farming. Wow. Led by the incomparable Sarah Stinoff. So shout out to Sarah.
What's up, Sarah?
And to Roz's point, it was like the first time we met, it was like we knew each other already for like 30 years, and we just been rocking ever since.
Yep.
And then I met Pastor Range, and it was on.
So guys, so let's get into this heavy. So November 3rd, there was a measure on the ballot, and if you can tell us, why did that measure happen? Why was that on the ballot versus legislators having that as or having an amendment or having a bill that was filed? What led us to people voting 67% to have cannabis legalized from an adult perspective in Jersey?
Yeah, sure. So back in 2019, they did try to pass cannabis legalization legislatively with the bill 2703. But unfortunately, it didn't pass really at that time. There weren't enough votes garnered in order for it to pass. So they threw it to the residents of New Jersey and said, we're going to pass it over to the people and let the people decide really what they want. And so then kind of midway through 2020, a coalition was formed, NJCAN, that was really spearheaded by the ACLU to promote cannabis legalization, but equitably, right? And so that was really the cornerstone of the entire campaign that made it different from campaigns really around the country, was the fact that we weren't just advocating for legalization, but we were advocating for equitable legalization. So we made sure we came out with a lot of content, really letting people know about just the absolute destruction that has caused to communities of color over the past 50 years. And so on November 3rd, we found out that it's 67% of New Jersey residents voted in favor, deeming this the most successful cannabis campaign in the country. So in every single county in New Jersey, cannabis won, right? So now we're looking at this, it wasn't even, kind of a bipartisan issue. Everybody really came together. And honestly, I think folks are really surprised at how well it did in the polls. And so now these legislators who may have been a little weary about going in favor of cannabis legalization, they now have data from their constituency that their constituency wants this, right? Yeah. And so now I think, there's a bit of more of a dialogue that can happen, because we're no longer talking in hypotheticals or theoreticals of what if it passes. It's passed now, right? And so the deadline really that we're looking at is January 1st, because this was passed through a ballot, and the ballot asked to amend the state constitution. So January 1st is when the state constitution changes. So if we don't have enabling legislation by January 1st, we're really going to be in a kind of legal market, but with no regulatory framework. And that's really been a lot of the rush. So legislation was introduced last Friday at about 6 or 7 p.m. And then there was a hearing in the Assembly and the Senate on Monday at 10 a.m. So it was a very quick turnaround time. The bill is now A21 in the Assembly, S21 in the Senate, but it largely mirrors 2703, the bill that did not go through last year. There are a couple of changes in there, but I would say anywhere from about 85 to 90% of the original language is maintained in this new bill. And, I, on Thursday, truth be told, I read, I anticipated that it was going to come through. There have been reports that they didn't really want to change much. They wanted really to just kind of push this through. And I remember that for the past really year, I had really been advocating against a lot of the language in there, because I just didn't think that it really addressed the harms that it should be addressing. And so I rang the alarms Thursday evening. I sent, I said, I did something that was very unfamiliar to me. I asked for help from my cannabis community, right? And while I never doubted that I would get it, I am not somebody who really goes and asks for help, but I knew that I needed it here in New Jersey. I knew that this was important enough. And so I rang the alarms. I called Leo, Roz, Tashita, Mary, Tahir, Tawheed, Nadir, folks who have really been in this space, who have really been about it and about the mission. And I just said, and I shot everybody a quick text, would you mind helping me? Testimonies happening on Monday. I need some backup in there. Not one person said no. Every single person said, absolutely. When and where do you need me? I said, Sunday at 4:00. Everybody said, I am there. And truth be told, it was something, what I think Tahir calls, right, the equity Avengers. That's what it kind of felt like. Captain America's asking for backup, and all of a sudden he starts looking around and everybody just comes in. That's exactly what happened. And I don't think
he made a movie. He made a movie with us.
And I don't think anybody really, expected it, but it was so important. And I was really happy that everybody also saw the same issues that I did, and were really able to, kind of just get on those issues and get on, similar pages in terms of really what we want and the type of messaging. So that's really where we are now. And so yesterday there were supposed to be, A21, S21 was supposed to be heard at the Assembly Appropriations Committee and the Senate Budget Committee. And they were pulled really 30 minutes before they were actually supposed to begin. And so, while we can just surmise really the reason for it, it is indicative that this bill is not going to go through as smoothly as perhaps they anticipated it, because of a lot of the testimony that was given, and a lot of really the media and the public backlash of the fact that there really aren't real social equity programs, right? And the one thing that, that I said is just in 206 pages, 95,000 words, the word social equity doesn't appear once. So you can't call it a social equity bill without actually putting those words into it and then creating a formal program defining who that is. Because we can have all of these really pretty language in the bill and all of this involved, but when you don't specifically define the communities that these programs are supposed to benefit, then it has no legs to stand on. And that's how, we end up in the predicaments that a lot of states have ended up in. So that's where we are now.
So Leo, give us what was the vibration at the community level when people start talking about legalizing? What was the vibration from the community? But what was the feedback that you were getting from maybe some of the lawmakers, especially from the Black Caucus and some of those lawmakers that were like, okay, where are we going with this?
Well, that's a good question, because what's interesting is one of the many hats that I also wear is I'm also co-founder of Cannagather in New Jersey. So at one point, we were the largest cannabis networking cohort in the tri-state area. We had people, all different companies and stuff like that. We've been doing this for years, okay, plural. So when everything jumped off, and Jess called me about that phone call on Sunday, it was Jess and I we're always already working. And so I knew that was the conversation where everything that I had been doing in terms of speaking with members of the assembly like Jamel Holly, getting in touch, I have been on the phone with Senator Cory Booker's office more times than I like right now. You know what I'm saying? Battling, on bill language, on what's missing, what isn't. And now that we're at this point, which Jess and I have been honestly, to be honest with you, me and Jess we knew this was coming. We knew this was going to have this. We knew it was going to be this way because of past experiences, i.e. Raj, you've been here dealing with those folks in the State House on a number of occasions like we have. So you already knew what we were dealing with. The thing is that as far as the streets were concerned, the number one thing that was important, and because all roads, no matter what, lead back to education or lack thereof. And you see that evidenced by the way the ballot question was written, a form of marijuana called cannabis. You see, it was so we have to educate these. Yeah, it was grammatically. And then mind you, we're in these hearings last week, and they're sitting there and they're telling, you have these lawmakers who are telling us that this is the greatest bill ever written in the history of cannabis, and this is so great and everything. And you got people like me and Jess with our mouths on the floor, like, what? So I had to let them know that, you could tell that this was written by a lot of people who have zero background in cannabis. And to be even frank, when you look at the breakdown, because now we're at that point where anything that we can get in terms of for people of color, for communities that was hardest hit by war on drugs, we're now at that point. These next 6 or 7 days are those critical times, because right now they're caucusing here. Okay, so now you have the Democrats, you have the Assembly folks, you have the Republicans, you have everybody. Then you have special interest groups like Citizens Action Committee, people who was never here during the whole effort to get this legalized. Now they're showing up out of nowhere talking about, I'm the so-and-so, the such and such, and this is how we should spend money. What? Yeah. Where was you when me and Jess was up here hooping and hollering like crazy? That's the stuff that was, and so having, and Roz, you were with us when we escorted a lot of these lawmakers out to Vegas, and we took them on a tour of a cultivation site, of a lab, so utilize, cultivating those relationships from off of that, those endeavors, those efforts, we're now using, we now have means by which we can talk with these folks, and that's what we're doing right now. So talking specifics, bill language and stuff like that, definitions of definitions is where we are right now.
So that's a great segue, because we had a comment, and I'm just going to go into it. Alexis Olive said, don't let Jersey become Michigan or Illinois. And just how important is it to really spell out specifically what we want and explain the difference between the infrastructure and then what happens after you have the infrastructure and when the commission comes in and sets the rules and the regulations of how that's going to be facilitated and organized.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of what was happening on the call one Monday when we were like, well, we want these things, and everybody's giving the recommendations. Really, a lot of the default answer was, well, the commission will figure that out. Well, the commission will figure that out, right? And while I'm very, we're like very happy about having Diana Waynu and Jeff Brown, on there, but we also want to give them tools that they can work with, right? And the legislation is really the first step in that. And so, I look at this really, from a very legal and policy approach, right? I'm a lawyer, so when I'm looking at a contract and I see that you're calling socially and economically disadvantaged communities, and I'm looking through 206 pages and I don't see what that is actually defined as, that's when I realize there's a huge problem, because I don't know what those communities are. That could mean a whole lot of things, and it could very well mean not the communities harmed by cannabis prohibition specifically. So I started to see this type of language, and I realized that we need an actual social equity applicant definition, right? And it's not something that is unheard of, right? Washington has it, Colorado has it, Illinois has it, Massachusetts has it, California has it, right? So there are already a lot of these frameworks created in states outside. And what I've been really telling folks is, here we are really at the epicenter, really on the East Coast, surrounded by the largest cannabis consumer market in the world, surrounded by Pennsylvania, Connecticut. We have a very, very big opportunity to lead by example, because we are going to be the first one really in this region. And so if we don't start off strong and say, actually, we do care about social equity and we have an actual social equity program, that's going to set the tone for all the other states who are looking to legalize. So I've been encouraging folks, even from out of state, to help join me really in this cause, because whatever happens here is going to happen everywhere else, right? And so when I am putting regular kind of proposed language through and my own recommendations, these are not things that are hypothetical, right? I am looking at facts. I'm looking at lawsuits that were happening. I want to make sure that we don't have the same delays really that Illinois has, the same delays that Massachusetts is having. And so when I'm talking to these legislators, I'm trying to make them realize we're not asking for anything crazy or outlandish or wild. We're asking really for very clear-cut definitions, right? And part of that is really funding, because even if we have a program in there, but there's no actual funding to fund these programs, and you just have a blanket statement that, cannabis tax revenue is going to go for, the oversight and regulation of the commission and its duties, well, that doesn't particularly earmark funds for social equity programs, right? And we've seen that when they're not earmarked, they're an afterthought. And then the excuse becomes, well, we don't have enough money. And that was kind of the conversation on Monday, where certain folks said, well, perhaps that's something we can do down the road, maybe, but, they were kind of concerned about the funding of it. And we're we're a big state in terms of population density. The cannabis tax revenue is going to be there. It's just going to be a matter of where is it going to go to. But when you can specifically earmark funds for police, there's no reason why you can't specifically earmark funds for social equity programs.
You better preach.
And they did that, and they did that before they earmarked funds for the police before they even said anything about us.
So
one of the
Leo, that's a good segue, because what are we anticipating? Let it be known that the state of New Jersey, outside of its constituents, the government sees this as an opportunity to fill in a budget issue, correct? And can you kind of talk about the approximate tax revenue dollars they think they may come in with the legalization, and how we have to really state what we want from the start? And I know that you have some ideas, Leo.
Yeah, well, a few years ago there was a report that came out that was done about the potential, of revenue loss every year that we're not legal for adult use, and it was at a 25% tax rate. And the figure came in like something like 330 million. And that was being real conservative. And so now we're looking at a different thing, which is a $40 excise tax on production and cultivation. And when you look at those numbers and you look at the primer for New Jersey, we're talking somewhere around $200 million a year. Now, the thing about it is that $40 excise tax, that needs to go strictly to communities of color. So I started calling it the restitution tax, because if you look at the ACLU's arrest report for the state of New Jersey, New Jersey has averaged somewhere between 25 and 32,000 arrests a year since the 90s, since 2000. Okay, we can go further back than that, but just from 2000 up to now, that's what the average has been. So, in my opinion, you use this to do something to me, so now I need to be made whole again. And so that's why I'm using the term restitution, because and just a FYI, I think a week or two ago, the governor let out a whole bunch of people out of jail you know, and a lot of prisoners came home, and a lot of them were folks who had, well, there was the first thing they did was they was taking off the cannabis charges on a lot of folks.
Yeah,
So they had a, go ahead.
no, go ahead. No, I was going to say that's going to be something we want to talk about. Is someone mentioned it about an expungement provision and how, you know, the Judiciary Committee on the Senate side has been having meetings regarding this legalization.
They passed the bill up last night.
Did they pass it up last night?
Yeah, it calls for, it went from, we went from like a pound to now it's just 6 ounces, you know, and then there's still some vagueness on, you know, distribution with intent to distribute. The penalties would be like a written summons at first or written warning, and then there's like fees, subsequent charges after that. Then they start adding fees to it and stuff like that. I really am not. I'm still on the fence with it. I haven't really come to my conclusions in terms of looking through this, because, you know, this is the only reason why 2703 did not make it through the Senate the last time, is because it was only by 1 vote. And that was because people couldn't get their brain around 5 pounds. We were calling for expungement up to 5 pounds. In their minds, and this was real, in their minds, they thought 5 pounds was like El Chapo. Like, oh my God, no, we can't let El Chapo out of it. And it was like, they don't understand, like, when it comes to weight and all this other stuff. Again, shouldn't be surprised, because look at how they wrote up the ballot question. You know, when they talk about cannabis legalization and everything in New Jersey, you got to understand, you know, they talk about drug driving. You know, they bring up kids. Every Halloween, we get blamed for pulling out edible candies and giving it to kids. Folks not understanding, ain't nobody giving away no edible candy. You know how much money that is? You know, like they, you know,
it's crazy. Hey,
yeah,
you know what, Leo? But before we get too far, because I know we're going to go into the expungement and so on, but I want to keep the focus on the money for a second, because you know, at the end of the day, I think we can, even if we don't get expungement right now, that's something we can go back in and tweak, right? It's much harder to go back in and tweak this money thing, right?
And that's where we're at the root of that right now. Like, where does this money go? Who gets it? The CRC, and part of the education is,
and that's kind of where my question is, you know, for both you guys, because I think in the industry as advocates, and what we've seen from other states, the conversation when we talk about, you know, adult use, recreational coming on board, and social equity is primarily been attached to just, you know, adult use and recreational. Whereas we believe there's still a lot of room on the medical side for us to look at some social equity as well. But we focus primarily on this licensing structure, right? And I know that this bill largely addresses how to give out licenses. But when we talk about the funding, the tax revenue that comes from it, the earmarking of that for, as you said, restorative, restoration of communities that bore the brunt on the war on drugs. What are some of the other things that we should be looking to have this funding earmarked towards, that maybe isn't on just the licensing front, but, you know, maybe taps into rebuilding the infrastructure of the very communities that these people are coming from?
Well, that would be one of the things that we have to first get through, is when I said lack of education. Part of the things, like, I talked with some folks with some of the national organizations here in New Jersey, and one of the challenges that I had was getting them to understand the differences between legislative language versus CRC responsibility. And that was because they, you know, these folks weren't getting it. They were mixing the two and not understanding. And then also, and this is, you know, to Jess's point earlier in terms of the devil being in the details, if we're not careful about the way we have this stuff structured, we could actually be setting the CRC up for failure, because some of this stuff can have them open up for direct lawsuits, you know. And so, again, it's not just about, you know, where the money is going in the funding, but the way the language is. And that's why I commend Jess on being so staunch on definitions of definitions, because this was some of the challenges that I've had to deal with dealing with just our people now. And that's it. Go ahead, Jess.
So just to build off that, for folks who may not know right now how the tax allocation is supposed to be, right now it has it in the bill in 3 buckets. So the first one is just kind of oversight and regulation of the commission and its duties. The second one is for law enforcement, for drug training. And the last one is all remaining monies goes to the state general fund, right? And so that's the
this is Jersey. We talking about Jersey. I told you Jesse was going to go off about that part. I told you.
She got 3 buckets. We anticipate that the state of New Jersey, in a full-blown, let's say 5 years from now, can theoretically have anywhere between $500 to $500 million to $1 billion in tax revenue. So 3 buckets, she's saying. 1 goes to the Department for Infrastructure to support all of the different pieces to run the program. 2 to police, and 3 to the general population. And this is why you have to be specific. All right, go, Jeff.
So go ahead, Eric.
No. You finish your thought. You're on the ground.
Theoretically, right, the argument can be made, well, right, these social equity programs would fit in the first bucket, right? But that's not a guarantee, right? And that's really what my issue is, and what I've really been calling for is we need a statutory social equity programs with language in the statute for tax revenue allocation. Because if we've all been promised a lot of things, right? And things that don't come to fruition. But funding is just going to be really a huge pillar of whether or not any of these social equity programs actually get off the ground, right? And we're going to need education for folks, right? We're going to need to help offset a lot of the licensing costs. Folks who don't know, it was $20,000 to apply in the last 2 rounds, right? So we're going to need to have that. We're going to need to have access to professional services for these folks as well, technical assistance. But the money really is going to be huge, because who are you going to pay now to help educate these folks? We want quality people really educating New Jersey when it comes to really licensing, right? And so that's why having the funding, right, something that I'm proposing really, because what you may also not realize for folks here on there is an office that is going to be formed. So the commission is mandated to form what's called, it's a terrible name, but it's called the Office of Minority, Disabled Veterans, and Women Cannabis Development. That's the name. And they're supposed to really oversee kind of making sure that all of the, the 15% for that go to minority certified businesses, 15% to disabled veterans and women, making sure that those goals are met for micro licenses, conditional licenses. But what is also a part of their responsibility is to ensure that and this is where the definition comes again, is to ensure that those folks from socially and economically disadvantaged communities are also involved, right? So if that's really one of their main duties, but those communities are not defined, that's not really setting up that office for success by any stretch of the imagination, right? And so when we're talking about tax revenue, right, because they're always going to say, well, where's it going to go to? Well, then it should go to that office, right? But there's something, you have to kind of peel back the layers. So once you say that this revenue has to go into the office, now we have to change the definition of socially and economically disadvantaged to equity applicants, right? And then what's an equity applicant? That's based off of now kind of called the impact zones in New Jersey. So now you have to redefine the impact zones as well. So this is really a 3-tiered layer that we have to go through in detail to ensure that these communities really are being addressed. But when you see a vague definition like that, and once again, like I'm a lawyer, any sort of contract anybody will send me, I'll be the first to say, what does this mean?
Yeah. But let me ask you this as well. You just ran through all of the hoops that we have to jump through just to make sure that funding is flowing into this department that's specifically there to make sure social equity is there. Whereas I'm sure the funding that is there for law enforcement is a blanket, earmark for that. And I think we also need to consider on the legislative front of earmarking that funding that goes to the police department for retraining and retooling. We can't at the same time say we want to decriminalize and make this a lower priority for law enforcement and then give them more money to do something, to do what with. So we have to also spell out what it is that they can and cannot do with that funding for law enforcement.
Right,
the
because
idea that we're making this legal and we're giving more money to law enforcement is, to me, just backwards in and of itself. We wouldn't legalize some other industry and then give the police some money to do oversight. they really don't have anything to do with this. And especially in a time when we are having conversations about, I'm personally not somebody on board with the whole defund police. I think we should reallocate and distribute and reprioritize. Those to me are much more favorable than defunding. And so when we talk about this funding that's coming from this cannabis tax, it also needs to be very specific to what they can do, or else we're going to be, feeding right into that same monster of criminal justice that has been beating down our community. But this time it won't be cannabis that they're beating us down for. It'll be something else.
And you know what? Eric, everything you're saying is correct, right? And this is once again, this is not a hypothetical to everybody. This is what happened in Oregon, right? Where they were getting 80% of this revenue, and then they couldn't even tell you who was not, right? I think only 16 officers have actually been trained. So, like, once again, when I'm talking to everybody in these legislators, I'm letting them know I'm not talking about theory. This is not something that it's not hypotheticals. I'm talking about precedent. I'm talking about history, things that have already happened that most likely will happen again, right? I'm of the belief of if it happens once, it won't happen again. If it happens twice, it's sure to happen a third time. And we've seen this happen over and over again in other states. And so it really is important, right? And, I submitted my written testimony, so this is public knowledge, but the way that I structured it was fine. Police will get, funding, but I capped it at 3 years. After that, really, the funds should really go back into the communities, because somebody actually said something interesting on Monday at the assembly. So Hector Osuguera, who he ran for Congress in New Jersey, he said, if you guys aren't drug experts by now, given that this plant has been illegal longer than most of us have been alive, then that's an issue.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that's going to be my question about community and reinvestment. Is there anything in particular or specific that talks about community reinvestment based upon the two bills that were first submitted? Going back in not social equity, just going back into those communities like Trenton and Leo, name them off for me: Orange, East Orange, West Orange, Camden, Newark. Being able to reinvest dollars back in there that you can say came from cannabis, made an impact in these communities.
Herein lies where I had a very long and prosperous conversation with the mayor of Trenton, Reed Gussiar, who just happens to be one of the original architects of the New Jersey medical marijuana law, and also the author of the New Jersey industrial hemp bill. So him being a mayor of the capital city, he just downloaded the bill last Saturday, and when I spoke to him, he was just finished reading it, and he recognized some things and didn't recognize other things. A lot of his language was pulled apart or what have you from his time in the assembly, but that was 3 years ago. His first thing was the impact zone, the redefining of that, because as it stands, cities like Trenton, Camden, Irvington wouldn't qualify for that impact zone because it was for a population of 120 and above. In Trenton, with our on the books population, we less than 100,000. But if you add our off the books population, it will bring us over to 100, but not at 120. So Reed had the second thing that Reed also talked about was we talked about the actual defining of the lines for where cannabis businesses can actually operate within these municipalities. Up until when we were talking, he thought that it was a state law requiring businesses to be outside of 1,000 feet of a school. Come to find out, it's just a strong state recommendation. So these are all things that need to get, that need to be discussed and talked about in terms of from like the mayors and municipalities and how they're seeing things as well.
And it's important that because each municipality has the option of enacting their own tax. So
absolutely.
If they do allow cannabis operations, they have really a maximum of 2% tax that they can really keep just for themselves, right? But there really isn't any language about what they're supposed to do with it. But even in the bill, they actually added something new. Now that we're talking really about on a local level, they added a new provision in there that I find to be quite problematic. They're allowing municipalities to enact their own licensing and endorsement requirements, right? So now this kind of increases the barriers to entry, right? Because if your endorsement requirement is you need to get, an official letter from a councilman or from a mayor, really we're going to get into the same thing that Massachusetts fell into, where with these community host agreements, where it was just like, well, I can pay you $25,000 towards your campaign and you can give me that. And it becomes a matter of who can line, the deeper pocket. So that's really, included in there. And one of the issues really is, when these municipalities, should they desire to really start incorporating equity program on a local level, well, that may be different, really, because there's no standards, there's really nothing. It basically just gives them full reign to do kind of what they want. The way that I'm looking at it is, they should be able to, if they don't want a cannabis operation, and they can put an ordinance prohibiting it and forego the tax revenue, but there should be an explicit provision prohibiting them from requiring letters from city officials. All you should have to do is say, show the ordinance or the codes and say that you are in compliance with the ordinance and the codes, and that should be enough to qualify, but not that you actually need the letters. But as it stands right now in the legislation, they have.
And if you don't do that, because you foster the whole pay for play thing, you know, you can get here, you can come here if you line the mayor's election coffers up with some money or some stuff like that, which has been a thing. That's actually a thing. Again, we're talking about Jersey. And one other thing I just want to put out there is that when I'm talking to folks, and understand, I always begin every conversation with understand something. We are talking about brand new, unaccounted for money. I ain't talking about allocating money from one department to another or anything like that. This is off the books money. Okay. So I enter into those conversations already. So don't tell me that you can't afford this and we can't give this bullshit. This is brand new money. You ain't never had this before either. So before you start prioritizing the cops and all these other special interest groups and everything like that, God damn it, this is going to go to the ones whose back you built this shit off of. That's us. Excuse my French, but I'm being time appropriate and how I feel about this shit, because I'll say it. Let's get this straight. We ain't talking about no program. I ain't talking about no grant. I'm talking about an industry, a whole industry. And what we also have to do is we also have to get, as far as from the advocacy part, we have to get our language amongst ourselves in alignment as well, because in order to effectively communicate, we can't be out there saying all these saying things that's going to get people in a tizzy, and we're not even in alignment. You understand what I'm saying? So when you ask 10 activists what equity is, you're going to get 10 different answers. And so what me and Jessica is talking about, and what Jessica's been hooping and hollering about, is that we ain't talking about equity in just the industry. We talking about equity in the policy making. We talking equity in the administration. We talking about equity in the enforcement, not just the industry. I want equity from the rooter to the motherfucking tutor. I want it all. Goddamn it!
Wait, one second. I gotta break.
Sorry, I'm just pissed. It gets me pissed off. Like I'm saying it all. And then Tahir jumps in. Tahir, Trent Mix.
Let me bring him in right quick, and then we're gonna keep it rolling. So listen, we gotta bring this brother Tahir Johnson in. Tahir, welcome, brother. Tell everybody who you are right quick. And he got his Uplift sweatshirt on. Shout out to Uplift and Kevin Ford out there. But we're happy to have you, and we want to bring you into the conversation. Introduce yourself, brother.
Yes, sir. Tahir Johnson with NCIA. Yeah, I do have the Maryland colors on, but I'm from Trenton, New Jersey. Trenton makes the world takes. My brother Leo Bridgewater. And just what y'all were talking about, that really is what's most important, right? And that's what I see. We have to organize, right? And that's one of the things that I thought was so different about this. When you look at our counterparts, they're organizing on a high level and a low level, right? And so that's why when Jess organized advocates from all over the country, all different areas, right? We're talking about people that are operators. We're talking about attorneys. We're talking about advocates. We're talking about regulators, right? Policy people to come together and say that we have the same message. That we're not saying that we don't walk in that room and Leo gets up here and says, I want this, but I get up there and I say, I want that, right? Because we need to let them know that we're coming together, like Leo said, this is an entire industry. We're talking about, we want the opportunity for Black folks. We're not just talking about, we're happy that the bill advanced to you know, to raise the limits and to decriminalize, we want to make sure we get a piece of this business. We want to make sure we have regulators of color that are going to make sure that they're putting regulations in place to even understand what we're talking about. You know, they just need the proper perspective.
Hey, Tahir, you know, NCIA is known as the oldest, you know, trade organization in the space, and you guys do a lot with, you know, legislative on state levels and at the federal level. You know, talk about, because, you know, there's often this idea out in the space that if we don't get it perfect on the first time, we failed. You know, I mean, I even saw one of our comments and so on that the advocates got had in this particular situation, right? But talk about the legislative process and what it actually takes to get stuff, you know, done. You know, we have these ideas of what we want, but again, you know, Jessica has talked about the nuance of the actual words and the definitions we use. But talk about the actual nuances of this damn process of getting somebody to sponsor a bill, amending a bill, getting rules promulgated. I mean, because people don't see that work. They see us out here screaming and hollering that things ain't go well, but they don't know how many other meetings behind doors we done spoke at. And so can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, hey man, to keep it basic, man, I'll say we just got to go back and watch Schoolhouse Rocks for real, right? Like it's a process, and when
but
you
that
think
thing need to be
about
updated.
Yeah, right. They need the 2020 version, like the 2020 cannabis version, right? Since we got all these states passing. But it really is like you said, Eric, there's so much time, thought, and planning that even before this bill got voted on, like Jessica said, this was born out of the bill that they put up last year, right? That already didn't pass. And so now the people have voted to say that we want cannabis, and we need to make sure that our agenda, so that when this legislation is actually crafted, that's why we have an opportunity, since it didn't pass, to come in and make sure we get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but there's politics is not a you know a single sport. Like this isn't where you're playing by yourself. You're playing against an opponent, and those opponents have strategies and tactics. And I mean, I even saw here down in Florida where, you know, we were trying to address affordability, and they attached it to some type of THC cap in the medical marijuana space. Now, of course, we support the affordability side, but we can't support this as a whole because of what it's doing on the other side, you know. So it becomes such a struggle to get things, you know, all the way through. And Jessica, I mean, I'm sure you can talk about that as well, even just with the initiative to get it on the ballot. I mean, you know, it's a process.
Yeah, and you know, one thing is you have to realize kind of who's on the other side, right? So the folks who made the bill, who put in the time to do this, who are kind of, you know, putting out their necks and sponsoring, right? And so I always, you know, advise folks, like, we kind of also have to make sure we're careful, right? In terms of what do we want to do with this bill, right? Like, I want to amend it, right? I'm not trying to just outwardly, you know, destroy it. I want to amend it to make it better than like what it is, right? And so, you know, I had somebody ask me, they're like, well, how come nobody spoke up last year when it was 2703? And my answer was, I don't know about you, but 5 years has passed between 2019 and 2020. We're in a completely, really, you know, things have really been brought to the surface, right? In the wake of George Floyd, in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, we need to make sure that our legislation is up to date and reflects what's going on in our current society, not what's going on really, you know, in 2019. A lot has really happened, you know, since then, that perhaps, you know, last year things weren't so visible. This was something that we just wanted really to get past. But now we're at the point where it has passed already. This is going to happen. January 1st, this is going to happen. So now we have the opportunity to amend it, to work with these legislators, right? And that comes down to providing recommendations, providing written testimony. So I'm getting a lot of, you know, DMs from people. I'm sure all you guys are. How do I get involved? How do I help? And I tell folks, the best thing that you can do right now is familiarize yourself with the bill. You know, we've all been talking about it. I've told folks, you know, if you want an outline, I'll send you an outline. But then write a written testimony or provide testimony and start contacting your legislators, right? Like, you have to step into the arena, because really the only way that this is going to change is if there are a lot of folks really on the same page. And when we had that phone call on Sunday, we all made sure that we were hitting the exact same right? While we may not all be in agreement on exactly how it's supposed to be implemented, but the same points are always the same. And I think that's where we really found our strength. And I think really that played a huge portion into them really pulling it yesterday, but I can only surmise.
Yeah.
And
One
I'll
thing
tell you
about it,
another reason and I was just going to say a reason that's so important is because when people talk about, to the question Eric asked before, when people talk about like what it means for the greater cannabis industry, like they're saying in New Jersey, right, is the domino that knocks down the rest of them for legalization across not just the East Coast, but we're talking about like favoring like legalization across the country. So if we don't get it right here, it has greater implications for everybody else. Also at a time where we're talking about potentially getting cannabis legalized at a federal level. So if we don't get it right here in New Jersey and we just say, hey, it's okay to just do this here and continue the status quo, that means the status quo continues everywhere, and we can't have that.
And, you know, kind of to speak on the federal thing, right? Like, our Senator Cory Booker, it is like one of the main sponsors of the MORE Act, which actually has allocation of tax revenue for communities harmed by prohibition. So for us to have, this federal senator really up there kind of sponsoring this bill, but then on the New Jersey state level not having it, that's a huge discrepancy.
it's a problem. It's not a discrepancy, it's a problem. And that's the one thing about, I will tell you, Illinois, shout out to Toy Hutchinson, who is the czar there. And one thing she's working through to get it right. But one thing that she said was, if you don't have this as a priority from the top down, from the governor all the way down to all the people that put the language together, it's not going to work. And so I want to go back and discuss expungement and the expungement provision and the social justice and making sure that we really address that. And what's our walk away kind of, what do we do next to make sure that we don't lose sight of expungement provision, if not in the equity bill, in a separate criminal justice bill or something of that nature?
Jess, or you want me to go, Jess?
Go ahead, Leo.
Okay.
Sorry, I was muted, but you can go.
Yeah. So one of the things that you have to understand from the onset, from the time that he got in, expungement and everything was something that was first and foremost on Governor Murphy's mind. He was counsel for the NAACP for almost 30 years. So this was something that was a big deal to him and also part of his campaign effort. Now, what needs to happen is, like I alluded to earlier, last night they passed an expungement bill of up to 6 ounces, I believe, with
the decrim bill.
Yeah, the decrim bill. Yeah. Now, what the governor has stated before is that what he wants money specifically earmarked to go to the putting together an entire system that would make it really, really easy for someone to get their records expunged, because what he has seen in the past is that people actually don't follow through with it all because the process is so taxing and they get turned off. And so so Governor Murphy's like, damn all that. Give me money. I want it all done. And so that was one of that. So that's the good news, at least from the governor's side of the office. How that actually plays out is contingent upon how well we can educate the assembly folks and the Senate folks on we're trying to state, like to Jessica's point, we're trying to save them from themselves. They just don't know it yet. And so that's where all the education part comes in. And then I'm gonna just defer to Jess at this point.
Yep, Jess, your thoughts?
So the last time really that I read the decrim bill, the one that just passed, but that was prior when it had a pound as opposed to 6 ounces, right? Like one of the parts for the expungement was they wanted really it all to be online, so that you go on, you fill out a form, you don't need to get a lawyer for it, right? You have somebody in the court allocated who's going to help you. But one of the issues that the ACLU has raised is that there's really no talk about where the funding is going to come from to set up that program. Where is the funding going to come from to really support kind of that program? And I think that's where we are now, because there was an expungement bill that had passed last year, but now that really we're looking at in terms of cannabis expungements, because we want those folks. That's really what we should be wanting, is encouraging folks who were incarcerated for cannabis to have pathways to enter the legal cannabis market. But if they can't get their records expunged, and some people may not know this, but New Jersey has the most onerous expungement process really in the country, right? So even I think like the Rutgers expungement clinic said that at most, if they're lucky, they get one per year. It's a really hard process. It entails a lot of paperwork, a lot of governing authorities and different parties. So this bill really made it so that, okay, well, now you can go online and fill this out. But like we all know that certain times filling things out, getting things to the proper authorities, that's not really easy, right? But we don't want them to, the burden should not be on them, right? The burden should not be on the petitioner who wants their record expunged. It should really be on the state. But the way that it's worded right now, the burden is on the petitioner, and there is really kind of no funding in order to help support that.
Well, and that's where funding should go into place, because instead of organizations like M4MM doing an expungement clinic where we're having to have attorneys on site to go through records and take out, let's have a expungement clearing day where we just have people come and sit down and do the initial. What it should be, if it's going to be the burden on the state, the burden on the person to do it, it should be on the state. But if the burden is on the person, it should be something that we can either create a automatic type of technology app that says, yes, I opt in, yes, I want to have my record cleared, or some type of one-sheeter that someone can sign off on and say, yes, if I meet the criteria in order for expungement, I want the state to start that process. And then that person should be able to walk away, and then the state takes it from there and hopefully be able to see that person's record get cleared, in my opinion.
And that was the thing that was some of the elements when we did that bill language for Reed, Roz, during that time frame, because that was right before the governor came in. When he came in, it was those aspects is why he was raising hell when they were trying to get this legislatively legalized too, because he wanted to Jess's point, people, he realized how bad it is here in Jersey, and he wanted it to be easier. And he realized then that there was no real money dedicated to it. So, and when 2703 came close, he raised hell the whole way through about there being money specifically earmarked to put that online system together. I think he was calling for like 15 million to be dedicated to that system.
And for those of you guys who are listening to us, if you don't know what we're talking about, literally for New Jersey, and Jess has already said it, like it's so antiquated where they're still on paper, and the paper logs are located throughout all parts of New Jersey. And so you could have someone that has a conviction in 2000 and, in 1995, and may have a conviction in 2004 or what have you. And you don't have the means to marry all that together to be able to go ahead and create an opportunity to clear their records. There's like the state of Maryland has an actual system that basically when we did the expungement clinic there, they literally were able to put their social in, put their information in, every charge they've ever had, anything that would be pertaining to any type of charge, they're able to see it. And those that met the criteria for expungement, they were able to put in a request to get that cleared, and they saw it all there. The attorneys did it on the spot. They walked away out of our expungement fair with their record already cleared. And so, Jersey, you got to get together, man. You get it together.
Education, Roz, is education.
Roz, I think another thing that was really important with what happened in Maryland was that although the onus is still on the individual, you had the state attorney's office who was very much involved, who wanted to be a part of helping people to get past this, especially as they saw what was happening on the legalization front in their state. And so I think even when you have these policies, I agree the onus should be on the state, but even when you have them, when you have a state attorney's office who sees this as a priority. And so again, I go back to what I said before, sometimes even when we talk about earmarking funding, sometimes we have to also reprioritize funding. State attorney's office already gets funding for certain things, but we may need to place greater emphasis on that, or find ways to kind of reprioritize the way that folks are treating these things. Because, the other thing that happens in this industry is that they'll put a policy in and then they'll slow walk it. Meanwhile, these companies are out here, they're not slow walking those revenues. You know what I mean? They getting out there and getting to it, but we get slow walked on getting our records cleaned. And so again, it has to go even further than just earmarking the funding, but making it, ways that we are prioritizing this. And this has to happen almost, as that trigger, and that helps.
It's called outcome measurement. You set goals in regards to what you want your outcomes to be, so that you can measure it. So if you don't set a goal, you know the number of individuals that have been harmed, that have some type of blight on their record. The state has to set goals. We have, if it's 100,000 individuals, well, for year one, we want to get 20% of those individuals get their records cleared. That's a very specific, measurable, tangible goal, and you can't do it alone. And that's why you have.
And Roz, you say year one, I say quarter one of legalization.
Yeah.
You know what, though?
I
just want to, and look, you know what? I want to put this out for the both of y'all. Is that you know, like, I have to inform or remind people here that one of the things that and this was all from the very, very beginning, because mind you, we are just in year 3 of the recovery of 8 years of Chris Christie. Okay. And so we not only do we have to shore up our medical marijuana program, but when I kept saying the whole thing about education, Roz, these folks are like, there are some words and things that we're talking about are very scary for people here. And the thing is, what's important that everyone realizes that during these times, recognize I never doubted whether or not it would go through for adult use. What I was more concerned with was the fact of by how much would it go through, because that number was important. And when you have 67%, people need to know that's that's history. Okay, never happened before. But what that also is for people of New Jersey, it's muscle. Now we have muscle, because, and to Jess's point earlier, every county said yes to this. Okay, yeah. So when we go talk to these lawmakers and we're trying to educate about all the things you just said, about record expungement, all the things you just said, Roz, about the work that was already being put in. That's what we have to educate these lawmakers on, that there is work being put in. But the fact that you got 67% of New Jerseyans saying yes to this, that's almost 2 million people, You know what I'm saying? That's something where you can't just pussyfoot around with this, you know, and you have to take these serious. Now, look, I know, y'all, I do a lot of hooping and hollering, and I'll be cussing up a storm and stuff like that. But I do believe in paying these politicians in the currency that they accept. And that currency is in the form of votes. When you got 2 million people who said yes to this, that's when you get to use the term overwhelmingly. You can say this was you can actually say that. Now you got a whole nother set of eyes on you. And that 2 million people, you know what we just became? A whole nother voting block. And mind you, all these people's seats are up come next year. You see what I'm saying? So there's a whole lot more that goes into making these laws, because what we're also doing is we're trying to set precedent, because you got other Black and brown people who are in states that are getting ready to do this, because it's not just the fact that Jersey did this by 67% and it was overwhelmingly, but you also have 5 other states you have 5 total states who did this at the same time, and you got 1 state that did this medical and adult use in the same election. So what we have an opportunity to become is the new jumping off point for how this industry is going to operate and engage those communities most harmed by the war on drugs. Now we have precedent. So I want that, and that was the challenge that I was giving a lot of lawmakers. Listen, there's a Black Lives Matter sign that's written on the street just a block away from the governor's office. If Black Lives Matter, okay, fine, put your money where your mouth is. I want call it restitution tax. All of that.
All of that. So listen, guys, we are almost at our time. We got to close for the day. It's critical. Listen, New Jersey, if you're a government official and you represent New Jerseyans, they want to make sure that social equity is the new green. You know, what's fair is fair. We want the same opportunity to be able to have the social aspect and also the economic aspect of this legalization to be a plus for our community. So as we wrap up, please go round robin to here in 30 seconds or less. What do you give one recommendation to people that are out there, advocates, supporters? What should they be doing right now? And then Jessica and then Leo.
Absolutely. So one thing that's really important is to mobilize and educate yourself. So like Jess said, the bill and the information on it is readily available. We're glad to help send you this information. Tell them you want this. The time is for action is now. We can't wait around. We can't wait for somebody else to do it for us. Call your elected officials and show up to these hearings, right? Like, if by all these people showing up at this hearing and being organized and tell them that we didn't want this, they didn't even have the second hearing. They just straight up canceled it. So there's powers in numbers. There's powers in being organized. So learn and be ready.
Jess.
Yep. So definitely echoing, what Tahir said. So, because I keep getting these things like, how do I help? I want to get involved. Let me know how I can help. The best thing that you can do right now is to really arm yourself with the fact of what's actually happening. And if you're not particularly sure, you don't want to read through 207 pages, the hearing that took place on Monday is available on the state website. So you can watch the whole Zoom. You can hear all of our testimonies if you'd like, and you can help echo us. But even if you're not from New Jersey, if you're from a neighboring state, even if you're from California and you really feel strongly, I really would urge you to please help us out in this cause, in this movement, because it's important that they also hear from states that have legalized, because you guys have lived there, you have experience, you've seen really the ramifications of what happens when social equity is not at the forefront. So I also urge you to also provide either written testimony or oral testimony when that time comes. And if folks have no idea when, I will keep updating on my Instagram, Cannabogada, CANNBOGADA. So please follow me. I'll be providing updates as best I can to keep folks apprised. But best thing you can use right now is your voice. The same way that we used our voice to vote for cannabis legalization, we now need to once again get louder and use it to make sure that it's.
Love it. Love it. Leo.
I would say, number one, make sure you start to re-engage your veteran community, and that's for wherever state you're in. Start to re-engage them, learn, and when it comes to the effort here in New Jersey, I would say start to know who the people are that's the boots on the ground warriors fighting for this. Like myself and Jessica Gonzalez. I give her the most high praise. Also, look at what Dashida Dawson is doing. Look at what Tahir Johnson is saying. Look at what Mary Pryor is saying. Look at what Nadir Pearson is saying. Look at what Tawheed Chappelle is saying. Know who's who and what all we're, and because at this point it's about having that unified message without there being too many minds, and we're not on the same page. And so also get with M for MM, and the CRCC, all Doctors for Care. Know those organizations who are actually putting in that work. And secondly, folks, like, we have to also look at who's our generals too, in terms of who we're fighting for from the industry perspective. Diana Waynu is one of us. Jeff Brown is one of us. Y'all need to know what you need to be paying close attention to is who those other 3 seats that are still up for the commission, who's filling those seats, and exactly what their background is. Because if you start to look under the hood of the picks so far, you'll find some things that are surprising. That's it.
Absolutely. Hey, let me just give a shout out to all the people that just rock with us every single week. Shout out to Lola and all your just comments today. Shout out to Bill Hughes. Shout out to Antoine Hines, Alexa, Chanel Bush, Shavonna Williams, New Jersey in the house. Love you, girl. We just thank y'all, man. Can I talk with Roz? We just doing it and 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 doing it. So with that being said, listen.
We went over a little bit today, but I'm glad y'all are still rocking with us. This is such an important, conversation, because I think, like Tahir said, what happens in Jersey will have impact for a lot of other states. So this is why it's so important that it is done right and done properly there. And so, for those of you who are trying to get involved, we don't necessarily need you to be the general right now. We got some generals on the board, but we need soldiers. We need people who are going to send out an email when it's time to send out the email, pick up a phone call when it's time to pick up a phone call. And, I don't know during session if you guys are going to have any type of lobbies or anything. That's when we really need y'all. When we can fill up a room and, we have the generals go up and speak, but the room is, filled with people who are right back there, fist pumping in the background. That's how we're able to combat the hundreds of thousands of dollars that are spent on the other side in lobbying. And trust me, I've sat right next to people as they cut them checks. So I know what it's like. So with that said, man, this has been such an awesome show. I told y'all it was going to be fire. Can of Talk with Roz. Again, like Roz said, we're gonna keep doing it till the wheels fall off. So thank y'all for joining
Thank
us and
you.
supporting us.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks for
Call
having
your
us.
state
Yes,
reps.
yes.
Call your state reps. Call your
Yep.
state
Hold
Call your
reps,
state reps.
please.
Yep. Get
Get on
involved.
their
Get
nerves. Tell
involved.
them I sent you. Shit.
on.
All right,
But
guys.
hey, listen.
Bye.
As always, go home, love on yourself, get some rest this weekend. We'll see y'all next week. We got work to do.
One
Another
love.
episode of Can of Talk with
Peace.
Roz.
Yeah.